Before the clock strikes midnight tonight, do the New York Mets have one last move in them for 2024? I'll break that down and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. Want to find any of my work? Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Happy New Year's to all of you Mets fans watching today. We are in the final day of 2024, and what a year it was for the New York Mets. They entered the season last year without a lot of high expectations. They fell flat right out the gate, went 0-5 before rebounding pretty nicely, carrying a winning record into the middle of April. Francisco Alvarez goes down. They have a miserable 6 weeks. Their May pretty much mirrored their June from 2023 that led to a fire sale. We were all thinking, fire sale again. Pete Alonso, Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, all those guys were expected to be traded at the end of July, and it was going to be another disastrous season for the New York Mets. And then everything changed on a dime. There was a players-only meeting. Francisco Lindor started an MVP campaign that came up just a bit short. We saw Jose Iglesias enter the fold with his OMG anthem. We saw Mark Vientos break out and become a star. Grimace was an incredible storyline that we all got to follow throughout the 2024 season. I'll never forget watching some dude in a Grimace costume chugging beers in the middle of a rain delay on Shea Bridge. And it was just a wild year. The end of the season, Francisco Lindor hits a monster home run that lifts the Mets into the playoffs. A couple days later, Pete Alonso advances the Mets to the NLDS with a miraculous home run against Devin Williams in the 9th inning. The Mets were down to their final outs. The Mets then beat the Phillies, the team that won the NL East in 4 games, clinched for the first time at Citi Field since the ballpark opened, and advanced to the NLCS where they came up just a little bit short. The season the Mets had in 2024 is hopefully the beginning of a long run of sustained success for the New York Mets. And they follow it up by signing a once-in-a-generation player in Juan Soto. But with the Juan Soto signing comes newfound expectations. Just making it to the NLCS raised the bar for what Mets fans should expect in 2025. But you land Juan Soto, you put a target on your back, and you now are a team that is right back in World Series or bust. That is the mantra now. That is the mentality. That is what you're pushing for. The expectations going into 2024, it was, hey, try to make the playoffs. Same thing could be said back in 2022, where the New York Mets were very active. They signed Max Scherzer, Starling Marte, Mark Canha, Eduardo Escobar, but they went into that year still an underdog, and then they reeled off 101 wins, made the playoffs, went into that next offseason, brought back Edwin Diaz and Brandon Nimmo, and signed Justin Verlander, Kodai Senga, Jose Quintana. That team going into 2023 was supposed to contend for the World Series, and they fell completely flat. So those World Series expectations can loom large on a team. The Mets are better suited to handle it, but they have to keep their foot on the gas pedal this offseason to build out a well-rounded contender. And I think right now we're at this point of the offseason where things have sort of dragged on a little bit. The Juan Soto signing was actually a couple of weeks ago, but it feels like so much longer because it can feel like you're moving through quicksand in the offseason with all these reports and not a lot of action. And we're all waiting on Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman. And I think we can get a little bit jaded and not realize just how much the Mets have already done this offseason. They had to replace 3 arms in their rotation, and they did that. They re-signed Sean Manaea. That handled one. That was the final move they just made. Prior to that, to kick off their offseason, they signed Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes. And you might not love those additions, but last year, nobody loved the addition of Luis Severino or the addition of Sean Manaea. And the Mets were proven right when they made those signings. They got way more value than any of us expected. And I'm sure they're counting on a similar result from Holmes and Montas. They're also hoping for a healthy season from Kodai Senga, continued progression from Sean Manaea. And if that wasn't good enough, they signed Griffin Canning to a one-year, $4.25 million deal, which I think was one of the more underrated moves of their offseason. I didn't like it when it first happened in an absolute vacuum, but the more I've had time to think about it, innings are at such a premium in Major League Baseball, and getting a guy that just threw 170 innings, regardless of the fact that it was ineffective innings, as he had an ERA over 5, it's still a pitcher that is stretched out, that's coming from a horrible organization, that the Mets might be able to get more out of. It's a contingency plan. If Montas and Holmes don't work, maybe Blackburn and Canning do. So I look at where the Mets are at, and I think a lot of teams would be envious to have so much depth that they can rely on in their starting rotation. So far this offseason, there's been 2 teams that have acquired 3 starting pitchers. The Mets and the Red Sox. The Mets have actually acquired 4. The Red Sox got Garrett Crochet in a trade where the Mets could not have possibly matched the package they gave up. They signed Walker Buehler to a 1-year deal, and they signed Patrick Sandoval, who's recovering from Tommy John surgery, so he won't even be available for the first half of the season anyway. You can make an argument that the Mets have addressed their rotation more than any other team in baseball. Now, the counter would be they didn't get an ace like the Red Sox did in Crochet, like the Yankees did in Fried, or like the Diamondbacks just did in Corbin Burns, but they got a ton of depth, and that's what they needed, and they reeled in Juan Soto. The Mets did a ton so far this offseason, but they are still missing a couple of bats. They still might need a big arm in that bullpen. There are still things that need to be done here for the New York Mets to take this offseason, which I said right now is probably at it's bad. I want to say it's a B plus, but getting Juan Soto should automatically make it an A. But tabling that to get your roster to a point where you're going into next year and you are thinking this is a team that is right up there with the Dodgers, with the Braves, with the Phillies, with the Padres, with the best in the National League. The Diamondbacks are in that camp too. They have to do a little bit more. If they want to be the team in the NL East, they have to do a little bit more. Can they pull off that one last move of the year to make us feel even better as we're all, clinking our glasses tonight, celebrating the beginning of 2025? I want to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened with me. I had a few subscriptions that were, oh man, I was embarrassed when I realized how long I've been paying these subscriptions. And Rocket Money made it easier for me to track them all down. And it was like having a personal assistant for your finances. Help me cancel those unwanted subscriptions. Rocket Money will monitor your spending, help you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users that have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features was that subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set money aside for my future, so there's no more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Do the Mets have one last move in them that will be reported before the end of 2024? At this point, it is not likely, but I think the one move that we could hold out hope for, that we're going to get a report on today, is Pete Alonso. The reason I say that is because the Mets are in an interesting position with their pursuit of Alonso and Alex Bregman, and Scott Boras is in an interesting spot with these two guys as well. He's already handled a lot of the heavy lifting for himself this offseason. He found Blake Snell a home early. He got Juan Soto the biggest contract ever. He's landed deals for guys like Tyler O'Neill and Michael Conforto, Usei Kikuchi, Frankie Montas, and Sean Manaea with the New York Mets. He's done a lot. And his roster right now of free agents, it's down to Pete Alonso, Alex Bregman, Max Scherzer, Jurickson Profar, Hae-Sung Kim. I believe I'm missing one more. JD Martinez. So those are his 4 guys left beyond Bregman and Alonso. The final 2 deals that he really has to hit on are those 2 big guys, because if he can get long-term deals for both Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso, he will shake off all of the trauma. I know Boras says he doesn't care, but all of the bad stink of last offseason with the Boras 4 and all those guys basically not having deals going into spring training and signing those panicky Boras contracts with the 3 years and the opt-outs and all that stuff. And it's worked out ultimately, right, for most of them, because Matt Chapman was able to get an extension. Blake Snell was able to opt out and get a big deal. Cody Bellinger and Jordan Montgomery had the pillow from that contract to fall back on after rough seasons. Jordan Montgomery has a chance to rebuild his value this year. I think for his benefit, hopefully it's not in Arizona and he's not even a Boras client anymore anyway. And then Cody Bellinger, he now got the chance to go from the Cubs to the Yankees. I think he's doing pretty well with the whole situation. So it ultimately worked out for most of those guys, but still there was that notion that Scott Boras was over the hill, that he wasn't in his prime anymore. And he'll talk about the market, and the market dictates the price of these guys, but it also does show right now that some teams just aren't putting up with Scott Boras. And I think the Houston Astros are the perfect example of that, because they really put Boras in an interesting spot with Alex Bregman, where they offered 6 years, $156 million, $26 million per year. It's a pretty fair contract, I would say, for Alex Bregman. They reported it out there. They didn't report it out. They leaked it out. So it was evident for everybody. Oh, here's the contract that was offered, but it was turned down. It was early in the offseason. Maybe the Astros knew that they weren't going to accept that when they were asking for $200 million. And so they were able to save some face with their fans, put it out there that they had a fair market value price for him. He didn't accept it. They pivoted. They traded for Isaac Paredes, and they signed Christian Walker to shore up those corner infield spots. And they basically closed the door on Alex Bregman. And now Bregman has one team that's really in on him. That's the Detroit Tigers. That's the one team that I think is looking at Alex Bregman and saying, long-term, you're our guy. But there's a price point. 6 years, $156 million. Why bid against yourself and go much beyond that? The Boston Red Sox have been reportedly in, but it really doesn't seem like they're aggressively pursuing Bregman. They have Tristan Casas for first base. Some reports came out today from the Boston media that they're not shopping him anymore, if they ever were at all. They have Rafael Devers at third base. They have Masataka Yoshida clogging up their DH spot. They would have to move one of Yoshida or Casas to bring in Bregman, or they have to put Bregman at second base, which really doesn't make any sense when you have a guy coming off a Gold Glove in the American League and one of the worst defenders at the position in Devers. Why in the world would you not have Bregman play third? So they're sort of in a weird way kind of out on Alex Bregman, even if they're still reported to be in, just because where are you going to play him? Again, you could put him at second base and have it be a stopgap situation. At some point, you might be able to clear one of those other guys, but it doesn't make the most sense. So if Bregman's market is down to the Tigers and then the Mets, who might be floating the short-term deals out to them to this camp, now Scott Boras is still trying to play that out where he gets Alex Bregman the deal he wants. And then the question is, does he want to go play for the Tigers? Does he want to go play at a ballpark that would be terrible for him on a team that, yes, just made the playoffs, but has been a loser for a long time now? Is that where Alex Bregman, who has known nothing but winning basically for a majority of his career, is that where he wants to go? Or does he view the Mets as a more exciting destination, a chance to play for an up-and-coming big market team that just landed Juan Soto? He might be in on that, but if he is, are the Mets signing Bregman over Pete Alonso? Are they committing years to Bregman instead of committing years to Pete. If they want both, how do you navigate that? And if you're trying to get both on short-term, high AAV deals, you got to be patient. So it's a really tough game of cat and mouse the Mets are playing with Scott Boras. But I think the groundwork to get to getting both done is to take care of your guy first. And maybe a little bit of interest in the Giants does force a little action here, or maybe the Mets just get to a point in their offseason where they say, you know what, we need to make sure we get our guy back, and they really get to the table and get a deal done. And I think from Scott Boras's interests, getting Pete done does not take Bregman off the table for the New York Mets necessarily. And hopefully you can still play into that a little bit to get the leverage where you need it from the Tigers. If that's ultimately how this whole thing's going to shake out, I think Alonso is the domino to fall first in this, and that could happen today. More likely, I think this might drag out a little bit longer. You have all January to get these deals done, and I don't think that Boras is going to settle for the short-term deals unless he has to. That offer can be on the table until you get to spring training. So it's either going to be the Mets who decide to force the issue a little bit. It's going to be Alonso and his camp expressing that interest and trying to get a deal done that forces the action, or it's just going to be a waiting game. Here's what I'll say, though. Sean Manaea wanted to be a New York Met. He ended up on the New York Mets. Corbin Burns wanted to be an Arizona Diamondback. He ended up on the Diamondbacks. Blake Snell wanted to be a Dodger. He got to the Dodgers. And ultimately, through a long, drawn-out process, I believe Juan Soto wanted to be a New York Met, and the Mets landed him. So these guys' interest does still matter. Scott Boras is responsible for getting them to the team they want to be on at a fair market value price. That's why I still think Alonso happens, and we'll see what happens with Bregman. But are the Mets done in 2024? Most likely, but they have a lot to look forward to in 2025. One of the free agents they can pursue in 2025 is Roki Sasaki. I want to give you a quick update on his market as his agent Joe Wolf spoke to the media again today. So we'll go through that to close the show. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. For an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, Joel Wolf spoke with the media today to give an update on Roki Sasaki, his top international client, an ace, potentially a 23-year-old phenom who can touch 100 miles per hour on the gun with a disgusting splitter. This is a pitcher that any team in baseball would love to have, because if you sign him, it is just like if you had signed some shortstop out of the Dominican Republic. You have full control over this player's prime, 6 years of team control. So he would be part of your rotation, of course, in the upcoming season, but you would have 3 years of him pre-arbitration, then 3 arbitration years. That is winning the lottery in a way that even Juan Soto is not, because you got to pay market value for Juan Soto. For Roki Sasaki, he's going to be cheap. Question is, are the Mets a preferred landing spot? Here's what we learned today. Market size isn't a factor either way. Joe Wolf was talking about that during the winter meetings, that maybe he might like going to a small market team because he hasn't liked the media attention that he's gotten the last couple of years. It's very sort of taboo. You're not supposed to leave before you're 25 if you're a Japanese player, because if you reach the age of 25, your hometown team, the one that you've been playing for in the MPB, benefits from posting you as a major league free agent, where they get, I think, what is it, like 20%, and maybe it's 10%. I can't remember the CBA exactly, but essentially, I think it is maybe 10%. They get a huge chunk of your contract that you sign with the MLB team. So Yoshinobu Yamamoto got his team last year like over $30 million, I believe, because he signed a $325 million deal. Now, the team that Roki Sasaki played for does not stand to make much of anything right now, because they're just posting him because he was so, persistent about wanting to come over that it just became too much of a sideshow for them. They decided to, just cede to his demands. But again, that made him a little bit unpopular, And so there was some thought that media attention might deter him from a big market. Joe Wolf is saying that is not the case. He said that 20 teams reached out to Sasaki with recruiting materials such as videos and books. Sasaki, who was very much in charge of the process, and I want to say all of this that I'm giving you is from Eddie Martino's report for SNY. So you can find that article. Mets, Yankees target Roki Sasaki's agent, and it says market size isn't a factor. That is the story on SNY, where he has a great bullet point list that I'm reading off of all the things that they learned, the media did, when they got on a Zoom call with Wolf today. So again, 20 teams reached out. Sasaki, who was very much in charge of the process, asked that all meetings be held at Wasserman's agency in Los Angeles. He also asked that no players attend the meetings. Each team got exactly 2 hours, so no team had an advantage. Sasaki is in Japan now with his family, mulling his decision. He might meet with one or two more teams, but he also could begin to eliminate teams. And he says the latter, Martinez says the latter seems somewhat more likely, that he's already starting to whittle the teams down. I think the industry perception is the Dodgers and the Padres are the favorites right now, but the Dodgers don't have a spot for him in the rotation. So as much as that's been floated, oh, he's going to go play with Yamamoto and Ohtani, I get it. And the Dodgers are good at developing pitching. They're not great at keeping pitching healthy. And they already have 6 starting pitchers pretty much locked in, not including Clayton Kershaw, who's expected to come back next year, not including some other injured starting pitchers they have, not including 5 guys that probably could start for other teams that are going to be just AAA depth or depth in their bullpen. I mean, they have so much pitching. If Sasaki wants to be an instant impact arm and get a chance to be in a rotation from day one, I don't think the Dodgers are the team. Now, it might still be because that's become Japan's team, but I think that the Padres seem like a more likely fit in their offseason is sort of hinging on it because they clearly don't have money to spend, and they would probably like to trade Dylan Cease before he becomes a free agent. If you sign Sasaki, Dylan Cease becomes more expendable. The Mets, though, to me, are a very good landing spot. They are planning to have a 6-man rotation. Sasaki would be one of those 6. They do have Kodai Senga as a Japanese mentor. They have proven their ability to develop pitching. And Wasserman, Sasaki's agency, does seem to value the Mets when it comes to their ability to develop pitching because they have, under their client list, Griffin Canning, signed with the Mets. They also have Clay Holmes, who is making this transition to start, and they chose the Mets as the destination for him to do that. So I think the advice he's probably getting from Wasserman, those that are advising him would be paying the Mets in a positive regard. Each team got a homework assignment that they had to complete to sort of show how they could work with Sasaki. It was the same assignment. I'm sure the Mets had the minds in place with Jeremy Hefner and others in that front office to do well on that homework. And if they did, and if they made enough of an impression, maybe they get one more meeting. That is still one of these big dominoes that could fall. Best case scenario for the New York Mets heading into 2025. They sign Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman. That would be unbelievable. Their lineup would be absolutely loaded. And if they could win the Sasaki sweepstakes and roll out a rotation that has Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, Roki Sasaki, Frankie Montas, David Peterson, and Clay Holmes, 1 through 6, all the depth they still have, they would be right there with any team in the National League, including even the Dodgers. The Dodgers would still have more talent on paper, but I don't think the Mets would have a massive gap between them and the Dodgers. That's what you hope happens. That's best case scenario. But if the Mets land one of those 3 free agents, I'd be thrilled. And overall, they have done a lot this offseason. We can't overlook that. So now we just wait 24 more hours to see if the Mets pull off one last move here in 2024, but 2025 promises to be a very exciting year for the New York Mets. I cannot wait to cover every minute of it here with Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you who have tuned into the show throughout the year. Each year over the last couple, I've had some goals to hit. I think it was probably 3 years ago now. I wanted to get to 1 million audio listens, right? At the time, the podcast has been available since 2019, and that's where the audience, found the show first. So getting to 1 million in a year was a big, big goal. I believe that was 2022's goal. We got there. 2023, I said, all right, let's get to 1 million on YouTube. We hit that. This year, I sort of had a lofty goal of getting to 3 million combined between the two. Didn't really know if we'd get there, but a crazy month of December has pushed us over the top. So I want to thank you all for helping me reach that goal. It's been an unbelievable year. I am so blessed to have this job. I love what I do, hosting Locked On Mets. I love coming on here every single night and closing my day, breaking down whatever the latest is in Mets land, whether it's a report that's out there, whether it's a big game that took place, whether it's a brutal loss. Any and all of it, I love to cover for you all. I love getting the messages from the listeners who tell me about how they open their day listening to Locked On Mets. Those first listens are so impactful. I really love hearing those stories, and I just can't wait for what 2025 will bring. It's going to be a great year for the New York Mets as they continue to build towards being the type of team that can compete year in and year out. Thank you all for tuning in. As always, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. And for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, our league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.